Welcome to Whiskey Cast, Cask Strength Conversation, featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 820 for May 24th, 2020. Coming up in a few minutes.
The idea of going out and having a whiskey with your buddies or with people in the industry, it's just part and parcel of what we do, and then not being able to do it, it's just so unusual. And in Ireland in particular, a lot of social gatherings is where you I suppose get to catch up with family and friends, and it just hasn't been possible.
This week, Dublin's Teeling Whiskey Company became one of the first distilleries to reopen its doors to visitors after Ireland started relaxing its lockdown restrictions to prevent the spread of the COVID-19 coronavirus. As we'll hear from Stephen Teeling later on Whiskey Cast in Depth, they're taking small steps at first, with just the distillery shop and cafe open for now. No tastings or tours just yet, while many other distilleries are watching and waiting before they open things up. I'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, your voice, and much more, all on this episode of Whiskey Cast.
From far beyond the wall comes a whiskey for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
When you land on something special, you just know. Redbreast, the quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey, and a proud sponsor of Whiskey Cast.
Let's start with the news. It's brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. Teeling Whiskey isn't the only distillery that's reopening its doors following government-mandated lockdowns. In Kentucky, at least 4 distilleries on the Kentucky Bourbon Trail reopened their gift shops after the state's lockdown ended on Wednesday, though they are still not able to offer tastings or tours just yet. Bardstown Bourbon Company, New Riff Distillery in Newport, Boone County Distilling Company near Florence, and Bluegrass Distillers in Lexington are the only ones open right now. Kentucky Distillers Association executives expect that number to increase soon, but indicate that most of their members will likely wait until at least the first week of June before opening. There's no word yet on when they'll be allowed to offer tastings or tours. However, Glenfarclas Distillery in Scotland has decided to keep its gates closed to visitors for the rest of 2020. The Grant family-owned distillery made the announcement this week after losing a member of the bottling hall staff to the coronavirus. George Grant told me it just makes more sense to wait until next year.
The summer season isn't really going to happen. Obviously, it would only be earlier at this point we would start hiring temporary staff for the upcoming summer season. Realistically, lockdown here isn't going to finish for at least another month, if not longer, and it's going to be bars and restaurants are going to be past that too. And then also we want to ensure that the staff that are working at the distillery are happy and safe coming to work. Part of the thing about people trying to visit the distillery is also going on tours, and we just felt as though we wouldn't be able to offer that in a safe environment. And especially doing a tour, if we are continuing to do this safe distancing of having people a certain distance to 6 feet, 2 meters apart, you can't really do that in a working distillery, which is so noisy.
Are all your people healthy so far?
Everybody at the distillery has been perfectly fine. We did unfortunately lose one member of staff at the bottling hall who died of coronavirus. So you hear things like that, it certainly hits home.
What do you think the prospects are for your colleagues around the industry to do the same thing? At what point might we see just more and more distilleries saying, we're not going to do this till the end of the year?
I mean, I'm sure sort of individually what people are going to do. I mean, we had thought about one point about, if we could just open the shop. But, we've just realized, well, we can just support more of our other retailers, do more events with them or do bottlings through that side of it. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just safety for everybody. And the whole travel side of it is going to be one of the last things that's going to be lifted.
So far, Glenfarclas is the first distillery in Scotland to confirm that it will not reopen to visitors through the end of the year. And with the UK now requiring most airline passengers entering the country after June 8th to self-isolate for 14 days, the prospects for a tourism industry recovery this summer are slim. U.S. borders remain closed to most international travelers, and the chances of whiskey festivals being able to take place are getting slimmer. Jan Louise Jones is a professor at the University of New Haven's College of Business, specializing in the hospitality and tourism industry.
Not having that international group come in is really going to impact, and it's just not going to happen this summer. International leisure travel is going to take a huge hit this summer, and until I think people feel safe going farther distances, that industry is really going to struggle. And I unfortunately think the larger the gatherings, the larger of venues are going to be the longest to kind of come back. So some of those bigger festivals, I just don't see that coming back anytime soon.
Jones applauds the number of distilleries focusing on virtual tours and e-commerce right now as ways to keep connected with consumers until the pandemic ends. Meanwhile, Glenfiddich has come up with a solution to help charities in Speyside with the bottling it created for the Spirit of Speyside Festival, which was canceled because of the pandemic. Maltmaster Brian Kinsman picked a 2007 sherry cask to be bottled for the festival, and all 450 bottles will now be sold through the Whisky Auctioneer website between now and June 22nd. The proceeds will go to the National Health Service Grampian region, along with Murray Food Plus and the Kieran's Legacy charity. Meanwhile, another Whisky Auctioneer auction raised more than £35,000 to help 7 of Scotland's independent whiskey bars. The auction featured 7 bottles of the first Daft Mill 2008 single cask to be released through Berry Brothers and Rudd. That cask was originally bottled for the 7 bars to sell by the dram, but all 7 have been closed since the UK imposed a nationwide closing of bars and restaurants as part of its pandemic lockdown. The bars include the Bon Accord in Glasgow, the Highlander Inn in Craigellachie, Artisan in Wishaw, the Fiddler's Inn in Drumnadrochit, the Ardshiel in Campbellton, the Dornoch Castle Hotel in Dornoch, and the Malt Room in Inverness. And while Whisky Auctioneer is back in business after an attack by hackers last month that crashed the multi-million-dollar Perfect Collection whiskey auction, the investigation continues into that attack. The Police Scotland Cybercrime Unit is still looking for clues on the source of the attack, which took down the online auctioneer's website during the final hours of that auction, April 21st. Whisky Auctioneer has declined our interview requests on the attack, but has acknowledged on its website that it is beefing up its security systems to prevent similar attacks in the future. In the meantime, the second half of the Perfect Collection auction will be rescheduled, with all previous bids canceled and the auction starting over from scratch. In other news, and this story has been in the works for a few months now, Isle of Arran has signed on with a new U.S. importer. Starting June 1st, its whiskeys will be imported by San Francisco-based Hoteling & Company instead of Castle Brands. The move was necessary after Pernod Ricard acquired Castle Brands last autumn for its Jefferson's Bourbon and other brands. And while it has continued to operate Castle Brands as a standalone unit, Pernod Ricard USA traditionally does not distribute brands from other companies, which put Arran's distribution rights in play. Hoteling plans to make at least 8 different Arran bottlings available in the U.S., along with limited editions from time to time. Blackened American Whiskey has released its 100th batch, and this one is different from the first 99 for more than one reason. As we've reported before, Blackened was created by Dave Pickerel and the members of Metallica using a proprietary sonic enhancement method in which the casks get blasted with playlists of Metallica's music. Until now, All of the playlists were selected by either Dave or the band's members. Rob Dietrich took on the role of master distiller and blender for Blackened last year following Dave Pickerell's death, and Batch 100 is the first one where he got to pick the music. Rob was one of the guests on our Whiskey Wednesday webcast this week.
I literally went down the Metallica rabbit hole. I'm a huge fan of Metallica since the seventh grade. So I was able to kind of dig through all the archives of music and find some really fun live stuff from the 1980s, all the way up to last year where they did All Within My Hands, a live record as well. So they actually they decided to take that playlist that we play that music to the whiskey at a low frequency, moving those barrels vigorously, so that whiskey's moving in and out, and they decided to lay down those tracks on vinyl. So we did a Batch 100 box release with 2 vinyl records with that playlist that was played to Batch 100, and as well as the bottle of Batch 100 and a couple other goodies in there. So it's pretty extraordinary. I feel very honored.
The Batch 100 box set will be available online with a recommended retail price of around $150 each. Now, when is a celebrity whiskey not a celebrity whiskey? Well, that's the question you have to ask with the new Sweetens Cove Tennessee bourbon. It's the first whiskey from Mary Ann Eves since she left Castle and Key as master distiller. The backers include football legend Peyton Manning, tennis legend Andy Roddick, and sportscaster Jim Nantz. They're all investors in the Sweetens Cove Golf Club just outside of Chattanooga, Tennessee, where one of the club's traditions for first-time guests is a shot of whiskey on the first tee. The 13-year-old whiskey comes from an undisclosed Tennessee distillery, most likely George Dickel, and Mary Ann Eves blended the final release. It'll go on sale this week for $200 a bottle through the Sweetens Cove website. The first 500 bottles are reserved for Tennessee residents only. After that, the rest will go on sale starting in Tennessee and Georgia at first, and eventually nationwide. Buffalo Trace is adding a single-barrel version to its Weller Wheated Bourbon lineup. It'll be available starting in June in limited amounts as an annual release. The suggested retail price is $49.99 a bottle. Back in December, we heard from architect Gareth Roberts in episode 795. Now, one of the distilleries he designed is about to release its first single malt whiskeys. Dartmoor Distillery has bottled casks of whiskeys matured in Oloroso sherry, bourbon, and Bordeaux red wine, and is now selling them in the UK and Europe through the distillery's website. Of course, most Scotch whiskies are double distilled, but the Glasgow Distillery has released a new triple distilled version of its Glasgow 1770 single malt. It's matured in virgin oak casks and bottled at 46% ABV. It's available through the distillery's website for £49 a bottle. That's around $60 each, though the distillery cannot ship to the U.S. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com. The news is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery, where they're making hand sanitizer as well as whiskey right now, and donating the hand sanitizer to hospitals and first responders to help fight the spread of the coronavirus. Heaven Hill urges you to join the fight, stay home, stay safe, and enjoy one of the 360-degree virtual warehouse tours, guided tasting experiences, and Season 1 of the Tales from the Hill podcast. You'll find them all at heavenhilldistillery.com. Think wisely, drink wisely. Time now for the calendar of events brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. And instead of focusing on what's been canceled or rescheduled, let's focus on some events that are still scheduled to take place. But keep in mind that those plans could change at any time, depending on public health requirements. Kalila, Lafroig, Bunnahabhain, and Ardbeg all have virtual Faisial events scheduled this week online, along with the Somerton Virtual Whiskey Festival and the Self-Isolation Whiskey Festival this coming Saturday. Acker, Merrill, and Condit will hold a whiskey auction with online bidding in Hong Kong this Thursday, May 28th. We've also heard from Bonhams that its live auction, scheduled for June 10th in Edinburgh, Scotland, is going ahead for now. Buffalo Trace Distillery has started taking registrations for its annual Buffalo Chase 5K run, July 4th in Frankfort, Kentucky. Whiskey Live Brisbane is still on the calendar for July 10th and 11th in Australia as of now, along with Whiskey Live in Perth, Australia, August 7th and 8th. Whiskies of the World San Jose is still on for August 7th, along with San Francisco the next night. Spirit of Speyside Distilled is still on as of now, August 28th and 29th in Elgin, Scotland, along with the San Diego Spirits Festival in California, August 29th and 30th. Once again, these events are subject to change on short notice, so please check directly with event organizers before you make any travel plans. We update the calendar at whiskycast.com as we receive updates from event organizers, and we've already started posting event dates for 2021 as they're confirmed. The calendar of events is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of Virginia's most awarded spirits. You'll find their Roundstone Rye at fine whiskey shops in 26 U.S. states and 3 continents, and online too. Visit the Where to Buy page at catoctincreekdistilling.com to find a retailer near you. And please, drink responsibly.
The search never ends, but it's nice when you can come in for a landing, pause and explore the silky smoothness of single pot still Irish whiskey, matured in the finest bourbon and Oloroso sherry casks. Land on Redbreast, then be sure to pass it on. Proud sponsor of Whiskey Cast.
Whiskey Cast In Depth is brought to you by Mortlach. Ireland gradually started relaxing its nationwide lockdown this week after 10 weeks of mandatory restrictions on travel, work, and events. And while distilleries were deemed essential businesses and allowed to continue production, tours, gift shops, and tastings were all banned. That ban came on March 12th, just a few days before St. Patrick's Day, which is not just a holiday in Ireland, but also marks the start of the tourist season. Teeling Whiskey Company in Dublin had around 2,000 tours, tastings, and master classes booked for the days around Paddy's Day that had to be canceled, and only this week was allowed to reopen the distillery shop and cafe for the first time since the lockdown began. I talked with Stephen Teeling today via FaceTime, and he described the situation over the last 2 months as a perfect storm.
We're waiting and seeing what the new world of travel will look like, and I think we got an opportunity to reopen the distillery, and as I said, we were one of the first to shut, but got an opportunity to open the shop and the cafe, and slowly creeping back to some form of normality. But I think from what it was to what we are now, it will be quite different, and a lot of interest from people as well, just to get back to some form of structure. And we've been lucky enough to be able to maintain a lot of the staff, and I think a lot of people wanted to get back and get a bit of a routine, and small little acorns, a good bit of interest in the distillery shop because we're doing the distillery exclusive, some bottle cocktails, and just a few items which again would be why people would want to come and shop at the distillery and stuff like that. But even for me, like, I got to bring my eldest daughter there yesterday to run around the distillery, and we realised it had been 10 weeks since she had been in any other building other than her house, which I think if you were to have said that to us 2-3 months ago, we would have probably thought we were part of a documentary of some form or a Black Mirror episode. But look, it's good to get a few green shoots, and I think World Whiskey Day for us was kind of where we set a bit of a flag in the sand to say, look, let's try and muddle our way through it, get to World Whiskey Day, and then reopen the distillery in different phases. And hopefully at some stage over the summer just due to the size of our tasting room and the distillery, we'll be able to get some people back in and I suppose work on a way in which some of the tastings can be, safety is the priority. I think the one thing we have is a lot of space, which is great. And like everyone just trying to adapt to the new world. I think I was thinking about it when I was ringing you there. It seems like a different lifetime ago when we did the tasting in New York. I think we were in Brooklyn in probably October, and we were launching our pot still, and we took a lot of things for granted. The ability to be able to fly to New York and sit in a room or stand in a room with 50 people tasting whiskey, and I suppose to have that now not as a possibility just is very unusual. And you're involved in the industry for years. The idea of going out and having a whiskey with your buddies or with people in the industry, it's just part and parcel of what we do. And then not being able to do it, it's just so unusual. And in Ireland in particular, a lot of social gatherings is where you I suppose get to catch up with family and friends, and it just hasn't been possible. So again, it's a global thing. So it's not that we're unusual. It's just, I think, just thinking about what the future holds, and looking at Europe as somebody who I think has loosened controls maybe a little bit quicker, and trying to see how they're operating in it. Particularly Germany, Austria, the Netherlands, and I think for Ireland, obviously, because the pubs and restaurants and hotels are such a big part of our economy and also our way of life. It'll just be interesting to see how that adapts and take it from there. But we first time ever having to launch 2 new whiskies virtually. So we launched we were meant to be launching our 28th.
Hey, take a breath for a second here, Stephen.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
No, let me ask a question in here once in a while, okay?
Sorry, I'm just, I suppose, excited to talk to somebody from the industry.
No problem. I'm just saying you're getting to be like Jim McEwen here, where you ask one question, wait 5 minutes, and then
he goes off.
I'm kidding, of course, but in all seriousness, how was it trying to launch 2 new whiskeys virtually for you?
Yeah, I think we managed to. I suppose once we realized the severity of what was happening, we adapted quite quickly. So we're used to traveling and not all being in the same places for long periods of time. So we had been doing quite a bit of the virtual stuff, not nearly as much as we have been, but we adapted quite quickly. So we started to do a lot of virtual tastings through Zoom and different things like that. Probably about a week or a week and a half after everything shut down. So we were just trying to work out in our heads, well, look, if we are going to be launching any whiskies, how can we do it? How can we get samples to people? How can we, I suppose, in a way, create that interest where people can't necessarily get their hands on the product or come to the distillery, or we can't go to them. And I think took our time, and we actually postponed the launch of our 28-year-olds, which was meant to be a year on from when the 24-year-old had won the world's best single malt. We were planning to launch it just after St. Patrick's Day at Whisky Live in London, and obviously quite quickly a lot of these things got closed down. So we postponed it, took a breath to sort of think, well, look, I think priority is to try and I suppose firstly shut the distillery down from a visitor centre perspective, then secondly just try and work out, look, are we going to be in trouble, make sure that we can get stock out to people and other things like that probably we wouldn't have necessarily ever had to worry about. So we took our time, chose World Whisky Day as kind of a I suppose, as I said, flag in the sand to say, look, we're going to hold off. Let's try and get samples out to people. Let's try and take our time and look and see really what a virtual whiskey launch looks like. So Alex did a video on, I suppose, the graduation and the logic behind the 28-year-olds, why it was an important bottling for us, where it started with our 21-year-old all the way up to the 24 and to the 28. And then on World Whisky Day, actually myself and Jack did a live whiskey tasting through social media. And it was just so strange that, like, you know, taking for granted going for a drink with your brother, not being able to actually do it, and all of the challenges. He has a young family, and so do I, as to trying to get your kids to sleep, to go and actually do this live stream and different things like that. But worked out well. And again, I think because we gave ourselves a little bit of time, we were able to get whiskey into the hands of the right people. So we launched it here in Ireland first, just because logistically that was possible. So we did it with Ali Alpine in the Celtic Whiskey Shop, and he has this thing called the Celtic Whiskey Club, where I think he has a few hundred members, and we managed to get some samples out to those guys, and we did a Twitter tasting with them on the Thursday just before World Whiskey Day. And then for the launch of it, the 28, Alex actually, for the first 28 bottles sold, he did a private Zoom tasting with people, and managed to get a cask strength version of the 28-year-olds out to people. So thinking on our feet, thinking of different ways in which, you know, we can engage with people. And yeah, we launched the Brabazon 3 as well, which was number 3 in the series, which we were actually planning on launching for World Whiskey Day, and managed to do a bit in the UK and get samples out to people, because again, it was part of a launch plan, and it was timed that there be samples in the right place. But you know, there's nothing quite like being in a room tasting with people. And I think, you know, we can whet the appetite and explain to people what the liquid is, but until they actually taste it and embrace it, I think it's quite different with whiskey, as you know. I think it's a lot to do with the occasion as well, and meeting people. So I think we're trying to work out what that looks like from a virtual perspective. And it was just nice to do something proactive and feel like we were taking a bit more action and control, because I think, like, for most people, you feel a little bit helpless with a lot of the decisions being taken out of your hands. So it was nice to get back to do something positive. And then, you know, following directly on from that, we were able to get the distillery open on the Monday. And, you know, the distillers have been in there making whiskey, but it was nice for us to get back in and, you know, I suppose, look and see what we could do with the distillery shop and get the distillery exclusives up again and different things like that. But it's still very early days, and we've only just in the last week eased lockdown restrictions here.
And that came as a bit of a surprise, because I don't think we were expecting, at least what we had heard was that at least pubs weren't going to be opening up until sometime in August. So but your retail side can open. Obviously, you can't do tours and tastings yet, but give me a sense of what you had to do in the gift shop to get everything sanitized and cleaned up after being closed for 10 weeks, where I'm imagining you had some dust in the place at least, and had to go through and clean up everything before you could open. Yeah,
we actually changed where the shop is. So the shop is usually on the first floor of the distillery visitor centre. We actually moved it down to an area just at the reception area, because what we managed to do was put in screens, which, you know, now are required, and put in vinyls and decals on the floor, just, you know, with social distancing. So we've actually attached the gift shop to the reception area where people would come in. But what we've managed to do is separate it off with screens. So perspex screens that just ensure that if there are people in, and also with the decals, that everyone is separated and there's no breach of the 2 meters, and, you know, people can browse, you know, from behind the perspex, but primarily we're getting people to call ahead and they're just collecting. So as I said, you know, trying to work within what we have. The one benefit of what we have is a lot of space, and, you know, for people in the area, things have been, you know, locked down for such a long period of time. I think they were delighted to be able to get out and even get some limited things like, you know, we work with a local roastery for some nice coffee, some pastries, different small things, as I said to you before, the 12th of March on our side anyway, we took massively for granted. And yeah, look, the response from the community around the distillery has been very positive, just to try and have some semblance of normality come back. And the fact that I suppose we were one of the first to close and to be one of the first to open gives us a bit of hope that, we can start and then we can learn as we go as to what is safe and what we can or can't do. And, a lot of friends and family involved in the trades. And I think they're trying to really work out how they can open, but also be safe. So that's still an unknown piece, particularly here in Ireland, just with the nature of our pubs. A lot of them are family owned and go through generations. They're quite small, and we wouldn't have maybe that culture that in Europe where they would have open areas or pedestrianised streets, or maybe the benefit of having lots of nice weather, meaning you can have lots of outdoor seating and stuff like that. So I think everyone's trying to get their head around it. I think there's a long way to go, and as I said, there's other countries, I think, who are easing things much more quickly. And it seems to me, and probably you be the same, every day I hear something different. So I'm probably every morning just checking in to see, look, what's changed, because definitely for travel, which would be an important piece for, let's say distillery tourism. The advice we were getting was that there was no travel going to be allowed until basically September, and that seems to be changing on a daily basis. That a lot of European countries seems to be saying, well, look, no, they need to get open and get open quicker. I think Portugal and some other countries were talking about maybe getting open second week in June. Greece, I know Spain are looking at easing things, Portugal. So again, I'm not sure, but what I do know is things aren't going to go back to normal anytime soon. I think it's just, well, what can we do? What can you do to make people as well feel comfortable and make sure first and foremost your staff are safe? And a lot of these things that have to be a priority. And I think the fact that it's quiet and we're going on baby steps is good for us, because it just means that we can make sure that if we do get busier in the summer, or even let's say September, October, that we've gone through the process of working out what we can or can't do. And as I said, I think for the staff, they were just delighted to get back in and get stuck back into things, because we had, a huge, the season in Ireland kicks off really from St. Patrick's Day, and we had over 2,000 people booked to come in that weekend that we shut down. And I think a lot of our plans based around kicking off the tourism season just had to be put on hold. So I think we're now trying to work out what's next. And I think the industry as a whole is slowly coming out of I suppose the extreme lockdown and working out what they can or can't do. We did some decent things at the start, where we actually had a distillery exclusive bottling that we're going to be launching for St. Patrick's Day that was ready to go, and obviously it didn't happen, which was our first ever bottling where we used Irish virgin oak. And like most people, we felt a little bit helpless. Like, we were doing a bit with hand sanitizer, we were doing a bit with some PPE stuff that we managed to get our hands on, but we ended up working with Ali Alpine, the Celtic Whisky shop, to do a special bottling, which was meant to be our distillery exclusive, but we actually did it for Frontline Heroes, and we sold 300 bottles through the website for Frontline charities, and it sold out within 2 hours. It was brilliant, and that again, just to feel like we were doing something, gave us, I suppose, a few things to focus on until we could get back up and running in the distillery. And we've continued to do a bit, which is, a drop in the ocean probably from what a lot of these charities need, but it felt good to do it and focus more on some of the local charities who we've worked with since we opened the distillery. And it's our 5th birthday coming up as well, from when we opened the doors in the distillery in June, that we're hoping to, obviously we won't be open to the capacity of bringing people in, but could we do something virtually? Can we do a special bottling? different things like that. We've actually got a really nice virtual tour now of the distillery that I can share with you. It's, nice to be able to go in, and we've done some audio with it and some nice videos. You can hang out at the Bang Bang bar, and you can, see some of your drinks and different things like that. So adapting. This word I've heard more in the last 8 to 10 weeks of pivoting, which seems to be the new buzzword of every Zoom call. How is your business pivoting in these current circumstances? But good that we could be nimble, and thankfully communication is possible now globally. You don't need to be in the same room as people.
Now, question I have, and I'm betting that you're probably not going to want to answer this.
Okay.
Have you and Jack even started adding up how much this has cost you to be closed for 10 weeks?
No. I think we would know, from a revenue standpoint, particularly what the distillery should have brought in. I think the question for us is, when things ease off, a lot of people talk about this V-shaped recovery. I think for us, just with the severity of the lockdown and I suppose no real light at the end of the tunnel, particularly for tourism, I think finger in the air stuff. I think the issue for us is the unknown of consumer sentiment. Once things do ease up, are people going to be comfortable to travel? You could make the estimate that you've lost, invariably 8 to 10 weeks of any revenue for a distillery experience. But, what comes next is the big question. And I think, I suppose conservative estimates from a lot of people would be saying, from a tourism standpoint or a hospitality standpoint in Ireland, they're looking at probably 40 to 50% on a, optimistic basis for 2020. So we're trying our best to estimate, but, it doesn't, there is no fixed idea about when things do ease up. Are domestic people, because they can't travel, going to be looking for more experiences on their own doorstep? You hope so. Will there be a lot of support from local? You hope so. But again, it's just estimations. And as I said to you, one of the big things for us was St. Patrick's Day weekend, where we had to cancel and refund, over 2,000 people in the space of 5 days. And we had some big events as well, which once that money is gone, you're going to be struggling to ever get that back. I don't. I'd probably, if I was to think about it too much, you wouldn't sleep too well. But I think the idea being, look, control what you can control, get back open, do some positive moves. As I said, launch a few products, focus on, I suppose Father's Day is the next big one for us, from a retail standpoint, and trying our best to get in the front foot with e-commerce. We're going to be launching our distillery shop online, because obviously people can't come to see us. So trying our best to do it that way, but these things don't happen that quickly.
What about the production side? Has Alex given you any indication of what being shut down for 10 weeks will do years down the line, when the whiskey that you would have been making for this 10-week period is ready to bottle? That's a question I've had from a bunch of folks is, Are we going to see shortages of whiskey down the road because of this?
Yeah, it's a good question. We thankfully were put on the essential services, or manufacturing of alcohol actually was allowed to continue. So we didn't actually shut the distillery. We continued to produce. So it was only the visitor experience side which had to shut. And as I said, we were involved in some hand sanitizer for frontline staff and different things like that. So thankfully we were able to continue. Because that would be a worry. You put a hole in your inventory for 3-4 months, that will always come back to haunt you. So no, we don't have any concerns in terms of that, because we were able to keep producing. And thankfully the distillery was set up in a way where you could have social distancing with the distillers working away, and they never shut. We were never in a situation where we had to shut. We had some issues with some supplies and different things like that, where we get some of our packaging from different countries, which again, logistically, there's been challenges all over Europe, all over the world, different things like that from a timing perspective. But thankfully, we've been able to keep going, because that was a big worry. I think we were trying to work out in our heads, saying, well, look, there's a full lockdown coming. What does that mean? Does it mean we can't ship product out? Does it mean we can't bottle product? Does it mean we can't produce? But thankfully, no, we were put on the essential service. So distilleries were allowed to remain open, as were breweries and different production facilities. So manufacturing in Ireland actually has maintained, which versus some of the other countries I know where there was more extreme lockdowns, we haven't been as impacted.
Let's look at the greater Irish whiskey industry. You've got a bunch of smaller guys that are in the same boat that you've been in, tourism-wise.
Yeah.
Will we see, or could we see, distilleries that don't make it back from this within Ireland?
Hard to say. Like, as I said to you, I don't know necessarily how, how badly affected a lot of people are. All I can do is estimate based off our own experience. Like, if let's say you're somewhere in the west of Ireland, or you're down in a place that lives off tourism, if basically our tourism industry is shut for 2020, it's a massive problem, not just for Irish whiskey, but for Irish hospitality. So hotels, restaurants, the Wild Atlantic Way, all of these places, we live and breathe tourism basically from March to September. So in the absence of those, I think there's going to be massive challenges. Again, I think fundamentally Irish whiskey as a category is still, a very good place to be in. If potentially you are forecasting to keep yourself afloat by having X amount of tourists in 2020, it's going to be a massive challenge. I know the government, through Fáilte Ireland and Tourism Ireland and Board B, are looking at different ways in which they can support. But, it's not just Irish whiskey tourism, it's tourism in Ireland in general. And, one of the big drivers of our recovery as a country was getting ourselves on the map for international tourism, which had been growing and growing and growing. And, in the absence of that, it's going to be difficult to replicate it with people in our own economy. And in particular, like reading the papers this morning, just based around unemployment rates and some of the economic forecasts for the rest of the year. And, if it does go the way they say it's going to go, it's going to be a very depressed economy for the foreseeable future. So not just Irish whiskey, I think Irish tourism will be in a precarious position, and hopefully we can get flights back and different things like that. Fundamentally, I think we'll bounce back. I just think the next year to 2 years is going to be a real challenge if people aren't comfortable traveling.
We should note that one of the first people through the door was John Teeling, Stephen and Jack Teeling's father, and the owner of the Great Northern Distillery in Dundalk, Ireland. He came in for his usual coffee and a pastry for the first time since the lockdown began. Thanks to Stephen Teeling for spending some time with us on WhiskyCast In Depth this week. It's brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret, hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies. Comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. Don't forget to join us for our live webcasts on the WhiskyCast YouTube channel, along with our Facebook page and Twitter. The Whiskey Wednesday and Friday night happy hour webcasts start at 5 p.m. New York time on Wednesday and Friday evenings. That's 2100 GMT. And if you have someone you'd like to see as a guest on one of our webcasts, you can always email your suggestions to us. The address is comments@whiskycast.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Let's start with the Redbreast Dream Cask Ruby Port Cask Edition, which we heard about last time around. I received a sample this week, and it'll go on sale to members of the Birdhouse Club starting on Monday at the Redbreast website. This 28-year-old single pot still Irish whiskey is bottled at 51.5% ABV, and the nose has notes of fresh berries, brown sugar, red grapes, hints of plums and apricots, and subtle spices in the background. The taste is fruity, vibrant, and intense, with raspberries and a hint of strawberries, along with red grapes, baking spices, and a hint of molasses underneath that adds complexity. The finish is long, fruity, and luscious with subtle hints of spice and oak. I'm scoring the Redbreast Dream Cask Ruby Port Cask Edition a 96. The Virginia Distillery Company recently released its first official bottling of Courage and Conviction American Single Malt, following a preview release last year. Batch number 1 is named for the distillery's founder, the late Dr. George G. Moore, and was matured in a combination of ex-bourbon, sherry, and cuvée wine casks. It's bottled at 46% ABV. The nose has notes of butterscotch, caramel, fresh berries, vanilla, and muted spices. The taste is malty with apples, raspberries, strawberries, cocoa beans, and hints of clove, allspice, and vanilla. The finish, long and fruity with good underlying spices. I'm scoring the Virginia Distillery Company's Courage and Conviction Batch number 1 a 92. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute. First, this week's tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey and its new Brewer's Select Rye Ale Barrel finish. It's a collaboration between Sagamore Spirit in Maryland and Sierra Nevada in California, where they filled Sagamore Spirit barrels with their red ale beer, then shipped those barrels back to Maryland to give Sagamore Spirit Rye a unique touch. Look for it now at select retailers, and get the whole story at sagamorespirit.com. We mentioned the revival of the Hirsch whiskey brand by Hodling & Company earlier this month. I received a sample of Hirsch's The Horizon bourbon the other day. It's a blend of 2 different bourbon mash bills from MGP that are 5 and 6 years old respectively, and bottled at 46% ABV. The nose has sweet notes of honey, brown sugar, a hint of caramel candy, and vanilla. The taste starts off honey sweet until the spices come alive with white pepper and allspice that complement honey, brown sugar, and vanilla with a subtle hint of dark chocolate in the background. The finish is long and smooth with lingering spices and a hint of honey. I'm scoring Hirsch The Horizon a 92. And let's finish up with another bourbon, the new Knob Creek 12-year-old. This was first released last year as a limited edition and has now become a permanent part of the Knob Creek lineup. It's bottled at 50% ABV, and the nose has notes of brown sugar, honey, muted spices, and hints of charred oak and leather. The taste has a good balance of oak tannins, black pepper, cocoa powder, honey, leather, and a hint of molasses. The finish is long and well-balanced with slowly fading spices, along with dark chocolate, honey, and a hint of oak. I'm scoring the Knob Creek 12-year-old bourbon a 93. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey. I'm adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of nearly 2,900 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
From deep in the north, far beyond the wall, the howl of the frozen wind brings word of something new. A whiskey from the land of always winter, for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, presented by Lot 40. After we reported the news earlier this week about Glenfarclas keeping its visitors center closed through the end of the year, We had several comments on social media. Jim Allen 197 tweeted this. Makes sense, Mark, managing expectations. Problem is that there are still too many whiskey enthusiasts talking about traveling to rural areas of Scotland even before the restrictions here are lifted. Scotland will reopen when it's safe. From @Dreams of Isla, believe me, as long as the distilleries remain closed, we won't have the slightest chance to travel to Isla or elsewhere in Scotland at all. Cancelled 2 trips until now by myself. Not until they think it will be safe for both sides. And Tosto Ricos added, although breaking my heart, hats off for such a courageous and thoughtful decision. Ansgar Speller and her husband Thomas run the Whisky Speller website in the Netherlands, and she posted this comment during our happy hour webcast Friday night. We miss the traveling, exploring, and meeting the people at the distilleries, talking about their work and the spirits they are making. Hope to be able to travel again soon together with Thomas to Scotland. I know how you feel, Ansgar. I can't wait to get back on the road again, too. There have been a lot of online tastings and webcasts over the past couple of months, and Nicholas Nastasi apparently can't wait to get back to tasting whiskeys in person again. He posted this on our Facebook page the other night. I'm all zoomed out. Definitely not the same. Jeff Edgar tweeted this question to us, along with our friend Mark Bylock of the Whiskey Topic podcast. If you were whiskey, what would your tasting notes be? Me, dry and full-bodied, especially in the bum. Pungent on the nose and lacking in subtlety. Lingering effect of cigarette ash and shame. Sarcasm lasts long in the finish. 99 points. Jeff, I have to admit that I've never considered that, but I'll have to give it some thought, though. So, how would you describe yourself in a tasting note? Share your ideas with us on social media. We might just read some of them on an upcoming episode. In the meantime, if there's anything else you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook at WhiskeyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your voice is presented by Lot 40, Canada's 100% pot still rye whiskey. Lot 40, unapologetically Canadian. Please drink responsibly. Let's wrap things up now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and all those other things that make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. I've mentioned before that I try to spend some time on Quora.com each week answering whiskey questions, and while we've addressed the issue of home distilling before, some people have a bit more time than usual on their hands these days, and they start thinking about it, such as this question. What is a good site for home distilling tips and tools? I'm interested in tinkering with my own whiskey ideas and would like a one-stop site, if possible, for both supplies and lessons. Well, if you're a long-time listener, you can probably guess how I answered that question. Keep in mind that it is illegal in almost every country, with New Zealand one of the few exceptions, to distill whiskey on your own without the appropriate federal and state licenses. In some U.S. states, it's illegal to even possess a still just as a display piece, even if you've never distilled anything in it. Most reputable still makers won't even sell you a still unless you hold the required licenses, because they're required by the federal government to keep records of their sales. Second, unless you know what you're doing, home distilling can be extremely dangerous. Not only are you dealing with explosive vapors that can, and sometimes do, ignite easily, even in professionally run distilleries, but unless you know how and where to make the cuts in your still output, you run the risk of putting very poisonous alcohols like methanol into your final output. That's how moonshiners have managed to kill people in the past, along with stuff like using old car radiators as condensers, while not having cleaned out all of the old antifreeze first. If you really have an idea for tinkering with whiskey, my suggestion is that you sign up for a distilling class at someplace like Moonshine University in Louisville, Kentucky, where they can also offer you the ability to test out your ideas with the proper licenses and supervision. Now, I'm not sure if Sean Campbell was the person who posted that question on Quora, but here was his response. Thank you for the excellent info. As I started digging into the Virginia laws, I found they're not exactly supportive of still ownership. Probably stick to my ABC stores. You were so helpful, I absolutely had to subscribe to the Whiskey Cast podcast. Thanks again. Sean, I'm glad to help. Welcome to the podcast, and you're making the right move. To say that Virginia is not exactly supportive of still ownership is putting it mildly. There's been a long history of illegal distilling in Virginia going back for decades, and an equally long history of police raids on moonshiners. Virginia is one of those states where it's illegal to even own a still, and there are usually 1 or 2 arrests each year when state police catch someone distilling without a license. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copperpot, a unique triple distilled premium Irish whiskey, combining single malt and single pot still. First fashioned in the 1700s and still a rarity today. Sure, as we say in Ireland, what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copperpot.
That's all for this edition of Whiskey Cast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the links for our Whiskey Wednesday and Happy Hour Friday webcasts, our Whiskey Cast HD videos, and the Whiskey Cast Tasting Panel podcast. You'll also find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the whiskey photo of the week in our downloadable Zoom backgrounds, the calendar of events, and, of course, you'll always find a complete archive of past episodes all the way back to 2005. We love to hear from you. You can always get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook at WhiskeyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
When you land on something special, you just know. Redbreast, the quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey, and a proud sponsor of Whiskey Cast.
From far beyond the wall comes a whiskey for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
Whiskey Cast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2020, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.